And the tribune said something to him in a low voice, and the two went over to the posts. They were joined by the head of the temple guard. Ratslayer, casting a squeamish sidelong glance at the dirty rags lying on the ground near the posts, rags that had recently been the criminal's clothing, and which the executioners had rejected, called two of them and ordered, "Follow me." From the nearest post came a hoarse, senseless song. Gestas, hanging on it, had lost his mind from the flies and sun towards the end of the third hour, and was now quietly singing something about grapes, but his head, covered with a turban, occasionally swayed all the same, and then the flies rose sluggishly from his face and settled on it again. Dismas, on the second post, suffered more than the other two because he did not lose consciousness, and he swung his head constantly and rhythmically, right and left, so that his ears struck his shoulders. Yeshua was more fortunate than the other two. In the very first hour, he began to have blackouts, and then he fell into oblivion, hanging his head in its unwound turban. The flies and horseflies therefore covered him completely, so that his face disappeared under the black swarming mass. In his groin, and on his belly, and in his armpits, fat horseflies sat sucking at his yellow naked body. Obeying the gestures of the man in the hood, one of the executioners took a spear and another brought a bucket and a sponge to the post. The first executioner raised the spear and with it tapped first one, then the other of Yeshua's arms, stretched out and bound with ropes to the crossbar of the post. The body, with its protruding ribs, gave a start. The executioner passed the tip of the spear over the belly. Then Yeshua raised his head, and the flies moved off with a buzz, revealing the face of the hanged man, swollen with bites, the eyes puffy, an unrecognizable face. Ungluing his eyelids, Ha-Nosri looked down. His eyes, usually clear, were slightly clouded. Ha-Nosri, said the executioner. Ha-Nosri moved his swollen lips and answered in a hoarse robber's voice. What do you want? Why have you come to me? Drink, said the executioner, and a water-soaked sponge on the tip of a spear rose to Yeshua's lips. Joy flashed in his eyes, he clung to the sponge and began greedily imbibing the moisture. From the neighboring post came the voice of Dismas. Injustice. I'm a robber just like him. Dismas strained but was unable to move, his arms being bound to the crossbar in 3 places with loops of rope. He drew in his belly, clawed the ends of the crossbar with his nails, kept his head turned towards Yeshua's post, malice blazed in the eyes of Dismas. A dusty cloud covered the place, it became much darker. When the dust blew away, the centurion shouted. Silence on the second post. Dismas fell silent. Yeshua tore himself away from the sponge, and trying to make his voice sound gentle and persuasive, but not succeeding, he begged the executioner hoarsely. Give him a drink. It was growing ever darker. The storm cloud had already poured across half the sky, aiming towards Yerushalayim. Boiling white clouds raced ahead of the storm cloud suffused with black moisture and fire. There was a flash and a thunderclap right over the hill. The executioner removed the sponge from the spear. Praise the magnanimous hegemon. He whispered solemnly, and gently pricked Yeshua in the heart. He twitched and whispered. Hegemon. Blood ran down his belly, his lower jaw twitched convulsively and his head dropped. At the second thunderclap, the executioner was already giving Dismas a drink, and with the same words. Praise the hegemon, killed him as well. Gestas, deprived of reason, cried out fearfully as soon as the executioner came near him, but when the sponge touched his lips, he growled something and seized it with his teeth. A few seconds later his body, too, slumped as much as the ropes would allow. The man in the hood followed the executioner and the centurion, and after him came the head of the temple guard. Stopping at the first post, the man in the hood examined the blood-covered Yeshua attentively, touched his foot with his white hand, and said to his companions, Dead. The same was repeated at the other 2 posts. After that the tribune motioned to the centurion and, turning, started off the hilltop together with the head of the temple guard and the man in the hood. Semi-darkness set in, and lightning furrowed the black sky. Fire suddenly sprayed out of it, and the centurion's shout, "Raise the cordon," was drowned in rumbling. The happy soldiers rushed headlong down the hill, putting on their helmets. Darkness covered Yerushalayim. Torrents of rain poured down suddenly and caught the sentries halfway down the hill. The deluge fell so terribly that the soldiers were already pursued by raging streams as they ran downhill. Soldiers slipped and fell in the sodden clay, hurrying to get to the level road, along which, now barely visible through the sheet of water, the thoroughly drenched cavalry was heading for Yerushalayim. A few minutes later only one man remained in the smoky brew of storm, water and fire on the hill.